Hey guys, tonight we're going to ask a question that might have been quietly humming in the background of your days. What if you're chasing a life you don't even want? You lie back. The room softens. There's that gentle hum of a distant car or maybe a whisper of wind outside your window. You're here, breathing, but somewhere inside, a part of you has been sprinting, chasing a dream, a goal, a life painted in the colors of success. But sometimes, in the hush before sleep, you wonder, was this dream ever really yours? You will not be able to control the world, but you can control yourself. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it for you? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're walking down a long corridor in your mind, one lined with framed memories of effort, reward, applause. Each step you take echoes slightly, like you're alone in a gallery of your own making. These are the images of what the world told you life should look like. The degree, the promotion, the home, the carefully curated moments. You did it, or you're getting there. So why does it still feel off? You press your hand lightly against one of the frames. The smile in the photo is yours, yes, but it doesn't quite match how you remember feeling. There's a hollowness that's difficult to admit, even to yourself. Because you're grateful, right? People would trade places with you in a second. And yet, this is where the first whisper of Stoicism enters, not as a solution, but as a flashlight. Marcus Aurelius, emperor of Rome and perhaps the most reluctant of kings, once sat in the mud of a military camp, writing private notes to himself. Not to boast, not to lead, but to stay centered in a role he never asked for. He wrote not to the world, but to his soul. Don't waste the rest of your time here worrying what others think of you. You let that sentence drift. You realize, much of the life you're living might be stitched together with threads you didn't choose. Expectations that felt like your own because they were sown in early, praise when you pleased, silence when you didn't. You remember being told what a successful life looks like. The house, the job title, the smiling partner beside you. But no one mentioned how it should feel. No one mentioned whether you'd feel free in it. And maybe that's the first contradiction we visit tonight. How you can have everything right on paper and still feel like you're missing your own life. You breathe in slowly. The breath feels unfamiliar, like someone else has been living in your body, chasing, striving, proving. The Stoics remind you, the externals are indifferent. That's not to say they don't matter, but they don't define your inner peace. Only virtue, your ability to live with wisdom, courage, justice, and self-discipline can do that. And here's the funny truth. Sometimes the more you win at a game you never wanted to play, the harder it is to walk away. You've already invested so much. But sunk cost is not a compass. Just because you've come this far doesn't mean it's the right direction. Epictetus would nod gently here, reminding you. First, say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. So pause just here. You've been running, but for whom? And for what? There's a small ache behind your ribs. Not pain exactly, more like a sigh that's been waiting to be released. You don't need to name it yet, just let it stretch. Imagine standing in a field. No paths laid out, no signs pointing the way, just openness. And you realize, without the markers of what you're supposed to want, you feel a little lost, but also strangely more alive. You remember a story, Seneca, the philosopher and statesman, immensely wealthy and powerful, who wrote about poverty not with disdain, but as a kind of freedom. He practiced discomfort, not because he had to, but because he knew. If you're not afraid of losing everything, no one owns you. And maybe that's what you're touching now. Not just fear of being on the wrong path, but fear of what happens if you leave it. Because what if you slow down and find nothing? That's the quiet terror beneath so many driven lives. But here's the counter-truth. What if you slow down and find yourself? In that stillness, you may hear the voice that's been quieted. The one that used to speak before ambition had a name. The one that asked different questions. You roll onto your side now, pillow cool against your cheek. And somewhere deep down, the question settles like silt at the bottom of a lake. What do I actually want not to achieve but to experience? What does it mean to live well, not loudly, not performatively, but with depth? No achievement can answer that for you. No title, no applause. Only stillness and the courage to listen when it finally arrives. You remember a time, not too long ago, when something inside you stirred. A flicker of discomfort, almost like a whisper behind your thoughts. You were doing everything right by the world's standards, ticking the boxes, performing well. But there it was, a low, persistent hum of discontent. You'd quiet it with productivity. You'd drown it with routine. But that voice, though soft, was stubborn. It would return on commutes, in the shower, at night when the room finally went still. It didn't scream. It didn't demand. It simply asked, "Is this it?" You didn't know how to answer, so you didn't. You kept going. Sometimes we treat our own truth like an inconvenient guest, always arriving when we're too busy to entertain it. The Stoics understood this dynamic well. They spoke often of inner harmony, not as a mood, but as a disciplined relationship with oneself. If your actions and your values are misaligned, there will be friction. Not always loud, but always there. You start to realize now, your life has been shaped in part by tuning that friction out. The ancient philosopher Cleans was once a boxer and a water carrier. He labored during the day and studied philosophy at night, often mocked for his slow progress. But he stayed true to a path not for glory, but for alignment. He chose a life few would envy, and yet he was deeply free. You too have made choices, many of them out of responsibility, some out of fear, a few out of love. But how many were made from alignment? It's easy to dismiss that whisper inside. We label it as self-doubt or laziness or dissatisfaction. But what if it's none of those? What if it's a warning, a compass quietly spinning? You shift under the covers now. The bed feels just a little more grounded. Your body is here, but your mind has been sprinting for years. There's a paradox worth noticing. We often silence the parts of ourselves that could actually guide us back home. Think about how often you've overridden your intuition. You knew something felt off, but the deadline was looming. You sensed you were heading somewhere you didn't want to go, but the title, the promotion, the promise was too shiny to question. And so the voice went quiet again. You learned to distrust it, but maybe the voice was never wrong. Maybe it was just inconvenient for the version of you that wanted to be impressive. There's humor in that. How much of our lives are built to impress people we don't even like, or to uphold a story we're too scared to revise? Here's where Stoicism meets you again, right in the heart of that conflict. The Stoics didn't advocate a life of avoidance. They weren't anti-success. They were simply anti-delusion. They urged clarity. If you're chasing something, know why. And make sure that why comes from within, not from comparison. Epictetus would often ask, "Who is your master?" Not as an accusation, but as an invitation. Because we're all answering to something. For some, it's praise. For others, legacy. For most, it's fear. You might say you're working hard for your family or for security. That's admirable. But even noble motivations deserve scrutiny. Because if your pursuit is secretly a performance, you'll know it by the feeling it leaves behind. Tightness, exhaustion, the inability to rest. You can't fake alignment. Your nervous system will notice. You breathe deeper now, and the thought startles you. What if that voice I've silenced knows the way better than the one I've been amplifying? What if the part of you that's been labeled unmotivated or restless is actually trying to guide you toward a life you'd recognize as your own? Seneca once advised his readers to rehearse the possibility of loss, not to live in fear, but to break the illusion that anything external could complete them. In doing so, we become less attached, more agile. We reclaim the power to pivot. You think about that. Could I start again? And then the even harder question, would I let myself? That quiet voice within, that subtle, persistent signal, it may not come with a plan. It rarely does. It's not the architect, it's the compass. And it's only as loud as your willingness to listen. You remember a time when you knew exactly what you loved, before life got complicated, before the expectations layered in. Before identity hardened around role, title, income. You pause. That memory isn't loud, but it's there. You were younger, maybe, or just more honest. You didn't call it purpose back then, you just called it feeling alive. It's still there, you know. Buried, not broken. Sleeping, not lost. And maybe tonight in this silence it stirs. You are not late. You are not behind. You are simply at the edge of remembering. The Stoics would smile here, not to urge you toward dramatic change, but to remind you that peace doesn't live in ambition. It lives in coherence. In choosing thoughts, words, and actions that reflect what you truly value. You don't have to have the answers, but you do have to stop pretending you're fine when you're not. You do have to stop silencing the voice that's trying to save you from a life that isn't yours. Let it speak. Even if it trembles, let it question. Even if it leads to hard choices, let it live. You wake into thought, not morning, not night, just a quiet space where awareness hovers. And as you lie there, you remember how much effort you've poured into crafting this life. How many times you've said yes when you meant maybe. How many times you've clenched your jaw and smiled, because that's what being professional or successful required. You've shaped things carefully. The career, the relationships, the image, but life doesn't always obey design. It spills over, it breaks things, it humbles even your best efforts. And lately, you've felt it, like a draft slipping under the door of a tightly sealed room. The sense that control is not what you thought it was. This is the Stoic crossroads, the moment you begin to separate what is within your control and what never was. The Stoics didn't promise serenity through achievement. They promised clarity through acceptance. You remember Marcus Aurelius again, sitting in a tent on the battlefield, issuing commands to an empire, writing in his journal by lamplight. And still he wrote things like, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." He controlled armies, and yet he knew the limit of command. You breathe in, deep. You've spent years perfecting plans, calculating outcomes, fixing problems before they could even fully appear. You were praised for it, but planning is not power, and foresight is not fate. There's a fine line between being prepared and being imprisoned by your own blueprints. And now, in the stillness of this room, you start to wonder, what happens when life doesn't follow the script you wrote for it? Maybe a relationship unraveled, maybe a career track changed, maybe your health shifted, or maybe nothing dramatic happened at all. Maybe things just didn't feel right anymore. And no matter how hard you tried to optimize or improve or reframe, the feeling stayed. That's when you begin to sense it. Your control was always conditional, partial. A beautiful illusion that worked just long enough to keep you moving. But now the illusion is cracking. There's both grief and relief in that. You sit with the paradox. Letting go doesn't mean giving up. It means choosing wisely where to place your effort. That's the Stoic principle at the heart of this moment, the dichotomy of control. What's up to you? Your choices, your responses, your values. What isn't? Outcomes, opinions, fortune. You breathe into that truth. It's unsettling but freeing. Think of Epictetus, born into slavery, who said, "Some things are up to us and some are not." He knew real power wasn't about external freedom, but internal sovereignty. Even in chains, he was freer than many emperors. You let that sink in. You've been chasing control like it was peace. But peace doesn't live in domination. It lives in discernment. You don't need to master the universe. You just need to master your response to it. And here's the gentle twist. The more you accept what's out of your hands, the steadier your hands become. Imagine a sailor gripping the wheel, not because he can stop the storm, but because he knows which way to face the sail. You're that sailor now. And the storm, maybe it's not even external. Maybe it's the chaos of chasing a life that was never yours, a dream passed down or absorbed unconsciously. And now, only now, you begin to wonder, what if I stop trying to control the storm and learn how to stand in it instead? There's strength in surrender, not the kind that gives up, but the kind that wakes up. You shift again, the covers brushing softly against your skin. You feel something new or maybe something old returning, presence. You're here. You're not fixing anything, you're simply noticing. And that noticing, it's a revolution in disguise. It says, I don't have to force this. It says, I can meet life where it is, not just where I want it to be. It says, I am not the architect of everything, but I am the steward of how I carry myself. You laugh quietly to yourself. There's irony here, isn't there? You tried so hard to make life predictable, but now you find steadiness not in certainty, but in perspective. And just like that, something unlocks. Control is no longer the goal. Clarity is. Alignment is. Peace is. You remember a moment not long ago when something didn't go your way. You were rejected or criticized or things just fell apart. You fought it. You replayed it. You tried to fix it. But what if you had asked instead, is this within my control? And if not, can I release it with grace? That's the practice. Not avoidance, not indifference, but freedom through wisdom. It's not easy, but it is powerful. You start to see the difference between effort and anxiety, between doing your best and needing the world to agree that your best is enough. There's a calm in that space, a center. And maybe, as you drift now, you can feel it again, like a quiet island in the middle of the ocean. You sitting calmly, letting the waves pass, not because you've given up, but because you've finally understood. You were never meant to control the tide. You were meant to know yourself well enough not to be thrown by it. The night deepens around you. A soft hum from the fan, a rhythm in your breath, and somewhere behind your closed eyes a truth is surfacing, one you've tried not to name. You've been living according to someone else's definition of enough. It wasn't deliberate. No one handed you a script and said, here, follow this. But over time, you inherited it. From teachers who praised achievement, from parents who feared instability, from a culture that sells productivity as virtue and burnout as proof of value. You adopted it slowly, like a coat passed down. And now, years later, you're sweating beneath the weight of it. There's something funny about expectation. It rarely arrives in your voice. It disguises itself as duty, as discipline, as should. But it often pulls you away from what's honest and into what's performative. The Stoics called this misalignment living falsely. And they urged its remedy not through rebellion but through inquiry. What do I actually want? It seems simple, almost embarrassingly basic. But you haven't asked yourself that question in a long time, have you? You've asked, what's smart? What's strategic? What's respected? But want? That's more fragile, more risky, because if you want something that doesn't match what's expected, you might lose approval, status, safety. Still, the question waits. And tonight, in this hush, it leans in again. What do you actually want? There's a pause in your mind, and for once, you don't rush to answer. That's good, because real answers take space to emerge. Consider Musonius Rufus, one of the great Stoic teachers. He believed philosophy should be lived, not discussed. That true wisdom came not from clever arguments, but from quiet courage. He once said that a life without examination was like a body without a spine, easily bent, quickly broken. And you've been bending for a long time, for deadlines, for perceptions, for approval you might not even crave anymore. But beneath all that bending, there's something steady, something that didn't get crushed. It's the part of you that still recognizes what feels real. Maybe it's the joy you felt making something with your hands. Maybe it's the time you helped someone without telling anyone about it. Maybe it's the long walk you took when everything felt heavy, and for one fleeting moment it all made sense again. That's not performance. That's presence. That's you unmasked. So here's a gentle rebellion, one that doesn't look loud but is revolutionary. Start subtracting. Not adding more goals or chasing new titles. Start asking, whose desire is this? Does it serve your values or someone else's narrative? This is the paradox. We build a life to impress others and then feel trapped in the cage we gilded ourselves. And here's where Stoicism gets tender, not cold. Because it doesn't say, shut down your feelings. It says, question their origin. Are you anxious because something's truly wrong? Or because you've been taught to panic when things aren't polished? Are you tired because life is hard? Or because you're pouring your energy into maintaining a self that doesn't feel true? You exhale. Something releases. Even now, you might feel it in your body, a softening in the chest, a loosening in the shoulders. Not because the problem is fixed, but because the pressure to be perfect is starting to dissolve. Remember the callback, the voice you silenced. This is one of its messages. You don't have to want what everyone else wants. And you don't have to feel guilty for that. Let's explore that with care. You've seen people leave high-paying jobs for quiet lives in the countryside. You've seen others abandon the pursuit of simplicity to build something massive and chaotic, but deeply fulfilling. Neither path is wrong, but what's wrong for you is pretending you want something just to avoid conflict, or failure, or loneliness. Yet even that fear can be seen clearly if you're brave. Fear of letting people down, fear of regret, fear of not knowing who you are if you stop chasing the thing that's been defining you. You're not alone in that fear. It's human. Even the great philosophers weren't immune. Marcus Aurelius wrote about his doubts, his temptations, his desire to escape. And yet every morning he returned to what mattered. He didn't do it with drama. He did it with clarity. You're learning that now. That a good life isn't built on motivation. It's built on meaning. And meaning can't be handed to you. It must be discovered, quietly, honestly, often painfully. So here in this soft quiet, ask again, what if you're chasing a life you don't want? Would you dare to stop? Would you have the strength to sit in the uncertainty and trust that something more honest might grow from it? It might not happen quickly. You might lose things, opportunities, connections, approval, but you will gain something rarer. You will come home to yourself. And when you meet yourself again, not the persona but the core, you might find something unexpectedly beautiful. You were never broken, just buried. There's a different silence now, not empty, not tense, but open, like the space right before a truth lands. You breathe through it and something settles in your chest. The realization that freedom isn't about doing whatever you want. It's about wanting what aligns with who you are. And suddenly you feel the subtle chain that's been wrapped around your choices. Not a shackle you could see, but the quiet pressure to always be productive, always be impressive, always be getting somewhere. Where exactly, that's never been clear. You've been climbing a ladder, but maybe it's leaned against the wrong wall. This is where the Stoics guide you gently inward, away from the noise of goals and toward the steady pulse of inner freedom, a state that doesn't depend on outcomes or applause. Think of Seneca, a man of immense influence, wealth, and status, yet he wrote of letting it all go. He spoke of practicing poverty, of imagining loss not to breed fear but to release attachment. He said, "He is a great man who uses earthenware dishes as if they were silver, and silver as if it were earthenware." Translation: don't let things own you, not your job, not your bank account, not even your reputation. Freedom isn't about escaping limits. It's about choosing your limits with intention. And that's the whisper you feel now. What have you been serving that no longer serves you? Maybe it's the image you protect. Maybe it's the routine that numbs instead of grounds. Maybe it's the constant planning that keeps you from actually living. You shift again in the dark, feeling how much energy you've spent performing certainty when in truth, you were quietly yearning for permission to pause. To not know, to reevaluate without panic. But no one gives you that pause, do they? You have to take it, or rather, allow it. You remember a moment when you were younger, standing at the edge of something new, school or love or travel, and you were afraid, but not paralyzed, because back then uncertainty still felt like adventure. Now, you've been taught to treat uncertainty like a threat, but the Stoics offer a different view. They remind you that uncertainty is the natural state of life. It's not the enemy, it's the teacher. To cling is to suffer. To accept is to see clearly. You begin to notice how much of your stress comes not from what's happening, but from your resistance to it. You keep trying to make life obey a script it never agreed to. But life is not a contract. It's a river. And inner freedom comes not from building walls against the current, but from learning to float. To trust your own ability to respond, to adapt, to choose again, moment by moment. You think of someone like Viktor Frankl, not a Stoic by name, but surely by spirit. Imprisoned in a concentration camp, he discovered that the last human freedom is the ability to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. That's not theory. That's practice. Radical, soul-deep practice. And here you are now, not in a camp but maybe in a different kind of confinement, the cage of your own assumptions. But unlike physical bars, this cage is one you can dissolve by questioning it. Ask yourself with honesty, is this life I'm chasing a reflection of my values or a disguise for my fears? Be kind in your answer. This isn't about blame, it's about clarity. You're not wrong for wanting security or stability or approval, but you're not required to keep sacrificing your peace to maintain those things, especially if they no longer feel true. And this brings us to a crucial Stoic tool: voluntary discomfort. The practice of stepping outside your comforts, not to punish yourself, but to strengthen your resilience. Maybe it means taking a break from distraction. Maybe it means saying no when you're used to saying yes. Maybe it means risking awkwardness to speak your truth. These small acts of voluntary discomfort prepare you to face life as it is, not just as you wish it to be. They build inner freedom the way weight builds muscle, through resistance. But not resistance to reality, resistance to illusion. You laugh softly to yourself. There's irony here too. You chased comfort to feel safe and ended up feeling trapped. Now you flirt with discomfort and feel oddly liberated. That's the strange grace of growth. And now you can feel it again, this shift from control to curiosity. You're no longer forcing the story forward. You're allowing it to unfold. Like watching a leaf drift down a stream instead of trying to catch and correct its course. That's inner freedom, not the absence of struggle, but the presence of choice even in the middle of it. So you ask yourself, one last time before drifting deeper, what if the life I really want isn't louder or bigger or richer? What if it's just more honest? The answer doesn't come in words, just a feeling, soft, clear, unburdened. There's a slowness to your thoughts now. Not sluggish, not dull, but deliberate, like the turning of a page in a quiet room. You're beginning to notice how many of your choices were made in haste, under pressure, in pursuit, in fear. But tonight, you move differently. You begin to suspect that much of life's clarity comes not in grand revelations, but in these gentle pauses, in the stillness between urges, between reactions. That's where your true self waits. The Stoics had a name for this space: apatheia, not apathy as we know it today, but a serene clarity untouched by the chaos of emotion. It doesn't mean you feel nothing. It means you are not ruled by what you feel. Imagine you're standing in a storm. The wind howls, the sky breaks open, trees thrash. But at the center of that storm is a calm eye, a place of stillness. That's what apatheia offers. And it's cultivated not by shutting out life, but by stepping back from your need to control it. You remember the small moment from earlier this week. Someone criticized you, maybe unfairly. You felt your pulse rise, your thoughts sharpen. You wanted to defend, to argue, to correct. But what if, just for a breath, you had let it pass? Not in defeat, but in mastery. The kind of mastery Epictetus described when he said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." There's humor in that, isn't there? Because so often your reaction is more painful than the thing itself. Someone cuts you off in traffic. You fume for hours. You receive a curt email. You rewrite it 10 different ways in your head. None of these events last more than seconds, but your mind keeps them alive, feeding them, turning them into stories. This is where the practice begins. You don't need to suppress emotion, just witness it. Observe your anger without becoming angry. Observe your anxiety without being swallowed by it. You are not your mood. You are not your fear. You are the space in which those things arise and pass. And they will pass. That's a quiet law of the Stoic mind. Everything changes, everything ends. Even the heaviness you feel now, even the chase, even the roles you play. Let that be your power, not resistance, but recognition. You sit with this. The power of not reacting. Think of Cato, the Stoic politician known for his unshakable calm. In the Roman Senate, when others raised their voices, Cato listened. When he disagreed, he did so with logic, not fury. He practiced daily, eating simple meals, wearing plain clothes, walking barefoot, not to suffer but to remember that peace doesn't require adornment. He believed the good life wasn't loud, it was lucid. And that's the irony. In a world shouting for attention, real strength whispers. Your mind drifts gently to your own life. How often have you raised your voice, not out loud but inside, pushing, forcing, urging yourself to be better, faster, stronger, more liked? It's exhausting, isn't it? But there's another way, a quieter path. It begins when you stop mistaking urgency for importance. Let's say you receive an opportunity that sounds impressive, but deep down it doesn't excite you. You feel a tightness in your gut, not fear, just misalignment. You ignore it, you say yes. Why? Because the world tells you to say yes. Because success tells you to never waste an opportunity. But what if saying yes to what's wrong is how you miss what's right? That's a truth many don't learn until later, until the cost of false yeses piles up. So here's a new practice. Pause, not forever, just long enough to ask, does this feel honest? If the answer is unclear, you wait, not out of indecision but respect. Respect for your own life, your own boundaries, your own time. This is Stoic living, not rigid, not cold, but sovereign. You are the steward of your own attention, and your attention is sacred. Give it only to what aligns, even when the world calls you selfish, even when the part of you that still craves approval protests. That's another paradox. The more you honor your own truth, the less you need validation. You might still enjoy praise, you might still appreciate recognition, but they no longer determine your direction. And that's freedom. Freedom from the life you should live. Freedom to live the one that quietly fits. You shift again under your blanket, the room is still, but something inside you is moving subtly, deeply. It's not a dramatic change, it's not a fire, it's a return to stillness, to clarity, to the you that doesn't need to perform, the you that simply sees and chooses. And as your breath deepens, you realize you haven't arrived at the end of anything, just the beginning of a different kind of presence, one that doesn't chase, one that doesn't run, one that simply remains. You wake, but not in the usual sense. Something within you stirs, not sharply, not loudly, just the quiet unfurling of awareness. You feel a gentle shift, like sunlight warming a windowsill. A soft presence enters your chest. What if I don't have to earn rest anymore? That question lands like a feather, and then settles into something more solid. Because somewhere along the way you were taught that rest must be justified. That stillness is indulgent. That to pause is to fall behind. And so you kept running. Running through your 20s, your 30s, maybe beyond. Even your downtime was active, scrolling, comparing, optimizing. As if stillness had to be productive too. But now, in the hush of this moment, you consider another idea. What if the act of being is already enough? The Stoics wouldn't call this laziness. They would call it alignment. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled an empire and still found time to write his meditations at night, often reminded himself, don't waste the rest of your life speculating about others. Instead, learn to withdraw into yourself. You picture him, sick, tired, surrounded by politics and noise, and yet finding a sliver of quiet to reflect. Not because he was idle, but because he knew action without intention is just a kind of thrashing. So you take stock. When did you last sit without distraction? When did you last say no, not out of fear but out of clarity? When did you last let yourself feel tired without interpreting it as weakness? The Stoics weren't emotionless. That's a myth. They simply practiced choosing their inner state regardless of outer noise. And tonight, you practice with them. You notice your breath, not controlling it, just observing. It enters, it leaves, and in between you are simply here. This is where the idea of euthymia emerges, a word Seneca loved. It means a kind of inner cheerfulness, a contented steadiness born from living in accordance with your nature. Not someone else's schedule, not someone else's expectations. Your nature. The way a tree grows toward light, not because it was told to, but because that's what it is. You imagine your life without the constant need to prove yourself. No resume, no performance, no curated identity, just you, breathing, choosing, returning. A part of you resists this. That's okay, it whispers, but what if I fall behind? And the Stoic within you replies, fall behind what? There is no race. There is only rhythm, yours. There's a softness to that truth. And a quiet strength. You recall a time in your life when you felt most at peace, not necessarily happiest, but whole. Maybe you were walking alone, somewhere natural, or cooking without rush, or listening to music that didn't demand anything from you. No achievements, no goals, just being. That's the paradox the Stoics embraced. Detachment doesn't mean disengagement. It means acting from essence, not ego. You still show up, you still work, you still care, but you do so without clinging, without tying your worth to the outcome. That's the difference between doing and striving. One flows, the other grasps. You begin to see it now. The life you've been chasing was always conditional. I'll rest when I'm done. I'll be enough when they approve. I'll be happy when I arrive. But you never arrive, not really, because there becomes here and then another there appears. It's the horizon illusion, always retreating as you move. So instead, you turn inward, not to escape the world but to stop outsourcing your peace to it. You create a different kind of horizon, one that lives inside you, one that doesn't shift based on trends or timelines. That's what the Stoics mean by living according to nature. Not just biological nature, but your inner nature, the deep, wordless clarity that knows what fits, what fuels, what frees. It's the same instinct that tells a bird when to migrate, the same knowing that tells a tree when to drop its leaves. It's not loud, but it's real. And when you listen deeply, honestly, it never steers you wrong. You're not lazy for pausing. You're wise, you're not broken for needing stillness. You're alive, and you're allowed to want a life that doesn't constantly feel like chasing a moving target. You breathe again, slower, deeper, each inhale like a hand unclenching, each exhale like a truth softening into your bones. There's nowhere to get to tonight. There's nothing to prove. Only this, you, present, whole, at rest, not because you finished everything, but because you realized you don't have to earn this moment. It's already yours. You stir not because something's wrong, but because something's quietly becoming right. The air around you feels a touch lighter, the mind less crowded. You're beginning to understand. So much of your suffering wasn't from what happened, but from how tightly you clung to what should have happened. Tonight, you release a little more. Release the grip, the chase, the image of the life you thought you were supposed to want. The Stoics didn't speak much about desire in the way modern self-help does. They weren't interested in manifesting the perfect life. They were interested in liberating you from needing a perfect life in the first place. That's not cynicism. That's clarity. Epictetus once said, freedom is the only worthy goal in life. But he didn't mean political freedom or even material freedom. He meant freedom from being controlled by your own mistaken beliefs. Beliefs like, I should be further along by now. Beliefs like, they owe me closure. Beliefs like, if I just keep pushing, I'll finally feel fulfilled. You smile softly, because haven't you chased that mirage? A job that looked ideal until it wasn't. A relationship that sparkled until it dulled under the weight of your expectations. A version of you that always seemed just one achievement away from being enough. And still, here you are. Not broken, just aware. That's where your transformation begins, not in effort but in awareness. You begin to question who decided what success means, who told you which life is worth having. Was it your family, the culture around you, the little voice that whispered you're only as valuable as your productivity? The Stoics wouldn't answer those questions for you. They'd simply remind you that not asking them leads to bondage. And asking them deeply, honestly, is the beginning of freedom. You shift gently under your blanket. A part of you still resists. That's natural. The mind loves patterns even when they hurt. The fear says, but if I stop chasing, won't I become stagnant? And again, you hear the quiet reply from within. Stillness is not stagnation. Stillness is direction without desperation. Stillness is the archer holding their breath before releasing the arrow. It's the sculptor pausing to see the shape within the stone. It's Marcus Aurelius rising before dawn not to conquer, but to write, so he could remember who he was before the noise of the day swallowed him. He didn't stop being an emperor, but he didn't let the crown decide his worth. And neither should you. You're allowed to shed the layers that no longer fit. You're allowed to disappoint the ideas that were never yours to carry. You're allowed to want less and feel more. That's another paradox. In letting go of the life you thought you wanted, you create space for the one that actually fits. A smaller home that feels like sanctuary. A slower career that brings genuine joy. A simpler day that leaves room for presence. There's no trophy for exhaustion, no medal for being perpetually overwhelmed, but there is deep peace in choosing differently. You remember someone, perhaps a friend, who once left a high-paying job to teach at a small school. People said they were wasting their potential. And yet, when you saw them next, there was a light in their eyes you hadn't seen in years. That light wasn't success, it was alignment. That's what the Stoics aimed for, not achievement but harmony, living in tune with one's values. You take a long, slow breath, let it rise, let it fall. You think about all the versions of yourself you've outgrown, how they tried their best, how they clung to maps drawn by others, and you smile gratefully, because they got you here, to this still moment, to this gentle inquiry. What if I already have enough? It doesn't mean you stop growing. It means you stop growing toward someone else's garden. You become your own soil, your own season. And in doing so, you find something precious, sufficiency, not perfection, not constant progress, but the quiet knowing that you can breathe here, you can rest here. You don't have to chase a version of yourself who doesn't even sleep at night. Let others sprint. Let the world buzz. You move like a tide. Like a moon, like something that no longer needs permission to be what it is. Your breath slows again, not because you're tired, but because you're done resisting your own truth. This is what freedom feels like, not explosive, but exhaling. And now, as your breath softens and your thoughts begin to dim around the edges, you arrive at something deeper. Not just the question of chasing the wrong life, but the quieter, more unsettling realization. What if the life I thought I wanted was never mine to begin with? The Stoics were not afraid of this kind of questioning. They welcomed it. In fact, they believed unexamined desires were a kind of bondage, chains you couldn't see because you were too busy polishing them. Seneca wrote often about wealth and ambition, not to condemn them, but to remind himself that pursuing them without wisdom leads to ruin. He was one of the richest men in Rome. And yet he said, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor." You shift slightly, not in discomfort, but in the subtle, tingling awareness of truth brushing against the edges of your heart. You think back to your earliest hopes. Were they yours? Or were they handed to you in small, shiny packages, wrapped in praise, tied with comparison, delivered through advertising, school, the stories you were told? Somewhere in childhood you began to dream of things, a certain house, a certain body, a certain kind of someday that glimmered just out of reach, and you grew up thinking that was the path because everyone nodded along, because the world applauded those who climbed it, even if they arrived empty and alone. But the Stoics offered another way, a quieter compass. They asked not, "What do you want to have?" but "What do you want to be?" Not "What can you achieve?" but "What kind of person can you remain, even when things fall apart?" That question sits heavy and still in your chest, because you've seen it before. People who had everything and were still angry. People who reached their goals and immediately made new ones, terrified of stillness. And perhaps you've been there too. Maybe you reached a milestone, held the diploma or the keys or the title and felt nothing. Maybe you told yourself it was just a phase, that joy would catch up later, but it didn't, because joy can't find you in a life built on someone else's instructions. The Stoics remind you gently, the path of wisdom is not loud, it's not flashy, it doesn't always get applause, but it leads you back to something real, to yourself. You imagine standing at a fork in the road. One path is smooth, well-lit, crowded. Everyone's heading that way. It smells like ambition and urgency. It hums with the sound of calendars and clocks. The other, it's quieter, less worn. There are no signs promising wealth, admiration, or legacy. Just an invitation. Live according to your nature. You take a step, not because you're certain, but because certainty was never the point. The Stoics didn't promise a clear map. They promised that integrity would be your compass. You look around your current life. Not just the big things, but the small ones. The clothes you wear. The habits that fill your morning, the people you say yes to. Ask yourself, is this me? Or is this a version I built to be liked, admired, protected? You don't have to judge the answer. Just notice. That's how change begins, not in radical overhauls but in gentle noticing. You recall the story of Cleans, who worked as a water carrier at night while studying philosophy by day. Others mocked him, but he was at peace, not because he didn't care what people thought, but because he knew what he valued more than their opinions. That's what alignment looks like. Not the absence of fear, but the presence of something stronger than fear, purpose, clarity. You might feel a little grief tonight. That's okay. It's the grief of old dreams falling away, of masks slipping, of roles you no longer want to play. Let them go. You're not failing. You're returning to the life that fits your shape, not your resume, to the rhythm of days that don't exhaust you just by existing. You breathe deeply, gently. There is no race. There is only the walk inward. And when you begin to walk that way, step by slow step, you notice the strangest thing. You don't miss the chase. You don't miss the noise. You don't miss trying to be someone else's idea of worthy. You begin to belong to yourself again. And in that belonging, you find something even rarer than success. You find peace. The air tonight feels different. Not colder, not warmer, but clearer. Like something inside you has been gently scrubbed clean. You rest a little easier now. Not because your problems are solved, but because you're beginning to realize they don't all need solving. Some just need releasing. The Stoics taught this not through slogans or self-help tricks, but through lived experience, through silence in chaos, through steadiness in storms. Tonight, your mind brings forward an image, a clenched fist. You've carried it for so long, this tension, this grip, this need to control. Control over how people see you. Control over how things unfold. Control over your future, as if worry could bend time or certainty could be purchased in advance. But what happens when you let the fist open? What happens when you soften? The Stoics weren't interested in brute control. They were interested in discipline, not of the outer world but of the inner landscape. You can't stop the wind, they said, but you can adjust your sails. That's the paradox of strength they lived by. And you've tried to fix everything, be everything, hold everything. But tonight you ask a more radical question. What if I'm allowed to let go? You remember someone, maybe an old friend, a former version of yourself, who always needed the plan, the backup plan, the safety net. Someone who mistook control for peace. But peace doesn't come from grasping, it comes from trust, not blind optimism, not magical thinking, but trust in your own resilience. You'll adapt, the Stoics say, you'll endure. You'll respond with virtue no matter what life brings. Because ultimately, the only thing you truly own is your response. You lie there, wrapped in the dark hush of your room, and realize how rare that kind of power is. Not power over others, power over yourself. Imagine a mind that does not react on impulse, a heart that does not inflate or deflate with praise or blame, a life that stays steady, not because it never shakes, but because you no longer hinge your worth on what shakes it. Epictetus was born a slave. He had no control over his freedom, his environment, or even his body. And yet, he found a kind of power that emperors envied, because he trained his mind to respond with wisdom, not wishfulness. You think of your own life now, the setbacks, the changes you didn't choose, the roles you had to leave behind before you were ready. You survived those moments, but more than that, you shaped who you are through them. This is where the Stoics shine brightest, not in their calm despite hardship, but through it. Hardship, they believed, is not the opposite of peace, it's the doorway into it. You let that truth rest on your chest like a warm stone. What if your most difficult moments weren't detours? What if they were carving you, not punishing but refining, not random but meaningful? You remember a phrase the Stoics loved, amor fati, the love of fate, not just acceptance. Love. To say, I choose this, even if I wouldn't have chosen it. I embrace this because it is already mine and I refuse to let it make me bitter. That kind of love is fierce, not sentimental. You feel it now in your belly like a coal glowing low and strong. It says, I have lived through enough to trust myself. I don't need to fear every bend in the path. I will meet what comes with clarity and calm. That's what makes you free, not the absence of difficulty but the presence of readiness. Not waiting for life to be perfect, but learning to walk peacefully through its imperfection. You breathe again, and this time the air feels deeper, richer. Like the air on a mountain after a storm. You think of all the things you've tried to control. The past, replayed in your mind like a worn-out tape. The future, mapped out with dotted lines that always shift. The people, the outcomes, the impressions. And you smile gently. Because you finally see you don't have to hold it all. You're allowed to lay it down, right here, right now. You let your shoulders sink, your jaw unclench. Even your thoughts begin to float more softly. The Stoics knew the mind was like a river. You can't stop the current, but you can choose whether to cling to every leaf that floats by. Tonight, you practice the art of letting them pass. You practice stillness, not because everything is solved, but because you're learning not to panic when it's not. That's maturity. That's peace. That's real strength. So as the quiet continues to gather around you, you return to that simple, unwavering truth. You are not behind, you are not broken, you are not a problem to be solved. You are a being to be understood and a life to be lived, not chased. Let the wind blow. Let the world swirl. You are steady, and that is more than enough. The quiet deepens. You lie still, not frozen but rooted. There's a difference. Stillness isn't passivity, it's presence. And tonight you are fully here, no past to rewrite, no future to manage, just this breath, this warmth, this moment. You may have spent years in motion, running toward goals, running from fears, running so fast you never stopped to ask where the path was leading or if it was ever yours to begin with. But now you're learning to pause, to question, to listen. And in that pause, something profound starts to emerge, a sense of inner direction. The Stoics called it proherses, your guiding faculty, the part of you that chooses, not your reflexes, not your urges, but your will. It's not loud. It's not easily swayed. And it's always there underneath the noise like a compass that doesn't care about the weather. You think of all the times you ignored it. When your body said no, but you said yes, out of obligation, fear, or the hope of approval. When your heart whispered doubt, but you kept going, because momentum can feel like purpose if you don't slow down to examine it. But now, you're not moving blindly. You're starting to align. The Stoics didn't believe in numbing emotion. They believed in training it like a wild horse, strong and fast, but better when it knows where it's going. You remember a time, perhaps recent, when you reacted quickly, harshly, impulsively. You told yourself it was justified, that they deserved it, that you were just being honest. But honesty without wisdom is just noise. That's what the Stoics taught. Emotions are not enemies but untrained allies. And when you pause like you are now, you can listen to them without obeying them. Anger says something hurts. Fear says something matters. Sadness says something has changed. You don't have to run from these signals. You don't have to over-identify with them either. You can simply observe. Like Marcus Aurelius did, writing each night not to escape his feelings, but to name them, understand them, and meet them with clarity. Clarity. Not judgment, not shame, not indulgence. Just the gentle discipline of knowing what is yours to carry and what is not. That's what this moment offers you. You lie in bed and without even moving, you reclaim something essential. Your sovereignty. You can feel what you feel. You can witness your mind without becoming it. You can hold your past in your hands, examine it like an old photograph and say, I honor you. I thank you. And now I let you rest. Because who you've been is not all you are, and who you'll become is not something you need to chase. The Stoics believed in growth, but not the kind that exhausts. They spoke of virtue as the highest aim, not success, not reputation. Virtue as a way of being, just courageous, moderate, wise. You ask yourself softly, what does it mean to live virtuously here now in my ordinary life? Not in a palace, not on a battlefield, but on a quiet night, under soft sheets, with the gentle whir of the world outside your window. Maybe it means pausing before you speak tomorrow. Maybe it means being kind to someone who doesn't expect it. Maybe it means setting a boundary, not out of anger but out of self-respect. Or forgiving someone, not because they earned it but because you deserve peace more than resentment. The Stoics remind you, peace isn't passive. It's active, steady, courageous. It's choosing not to let the world dictate your mood, not letting someone else's chaos pull you into theirs. It's waking up each day and saying, I will meet whatever comes with calm because I've trained for this. And in a way you have. Every moment of reflection is training, every act of restraint, every breath you take instead of snapping, every time you let go of control and return to presence. It all counts. And tonight it's enough. You don't need to prove anything. You're not behind, you haven't missed your life. You're exactly where you need to be to begin again. So you rest your mind, you soften your body, and you listen, not to the noise of the world but to the quiet inside you that has always known the way. This isn't the end of your journey. It's not even a detour. It's the moment your feet begin to touch the ground again. And maybe, just maybe, it's the first step toward a life that no longer needs chasing, because it already fits the shape of your soul. The night carries you gently now. The rhythm of your breath, soft and even, feels like a tide pulling you closer to something essential, something you almost forgot you already had. A sense of self, not the curated version you present to the world, not the checklist of accomplishments or the roles you've played, but the quiet, durable you, the one who exists even when the lights are off and the crowd is gone. The Stoics didn't teach you to become someone else. They taught you to remember who you already are, beneath the noise, beneath the stories. You are not the thoughts that flicker across your mind like moths at night. You are the lamp they gather around, a still point, a source of light, unmoved by the fluttering. That's what Epictetus meant when he said that freedom begins the moment we stop blaming others for our suffering. Because it's never about the storm, it's about the anchor. And tonight, as you lie here, you're learning what it means to drop anchor, to stop chasing the wind, to root yourself in something deeper than mood, deeper than image, deeper than desire. Because chasing, even when it's framed as growth, can become a trap. You've seen this before, the constant upgrading, the endless striving, the belief that happiness lives just one more achievement away, one more relationship, one more zero in the bank account. But what if the life you're chasing isn't actually yours? What if the ladder you're climbing is leaning on the wrong wall? You don't need to throw everything away. The Stoics weren't ascetics for the sake of denial. They didn't reject life, they clarified it. They asked, does this serve my soul or just my ego? Is this aligned with nature or only my fear of not being enough? These aren't questions you answer once. They are the pulse of an examined life. And tonight, as you rest here, you begin to feel the difference between restlessness and readiness, between striving and living. You think of Cato walking barefoot, wearing simple clothes, practicing poverty in times of plenty. Why? Not because he hated comfort, but because he wanted to be free from the fear of losing it. He trained himself to live without, so he wouldn't be enslaved by having. That's a kind of power that can't be bought. And you wonder, what am I afraid to lose? What do I grip so tightly that it grips me back? Maybe it's a title. Maybe it's a version of yourself you've outgrown. Maybe it's a dream you once needed but no longer fits. The paradox is this. Letting go doesn't make you lose yourself. It returns you to yourself. You feel this now, as if a weight you didn't know you were carrying has shifted. You don't need to discard everything, but you do need to question what you're carrying out of habit, out of fear, out of a need to belong in a story that was never written for you. Because the truth is, your life is not a performance. It's not a series of impressive bullet points. It's not a highlight reel. It's a series of quiet choices, and you are free to make different ones now, free to rest without guilt, free to not know what comes next, free to value who you are, not just what you produce. That's radical in a world that tells you to keep moving, keep optimizing, keep becoming. But the Stoics whisper a gentler truth. Sometimes becoming more is just remembering how to be. You close your eyes. Not because you're trying to escape, but because you're finally home. Not in a place, not in a person, but in yourself. Your heartbeat is steady. Your breath is enough. You are not late. You are not lacking. You are not broken. You are returning. And as you do, the night wraps around you like a soft cloak. No need to rush. No need to prove. Only the quiet trust that whatever tomorrow brings, you'll meet it not with fear, but with presence. Because the chase is over, and the living has begun. There's a hush now, deep and weightless. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of arrival. You've been walking through this story, through memory and philosophy, through tension and release, and now something in you has settled. Not as an endpoint, but as an opening. You are beginning to hear what your soul has been whispering beneath the noise. This is your life. Not the ideal version. Not the one with everything figured out. Just this, quiet, imperfect, fully real. And it's enough. You lie here not to escape your day, but to make peace with it. There were things you didn't get done, things you wish you'd handled better, thoughts that tugged at your calm like threads in the dark. But you made it here. You paused. You reflected. And in doing so, you practiced the most radical form of Stoicism. You returned to yourself without judgment. The Stoics were not perfectionists. They were practitioners. They knew a calm life isn't one without conflict. It's one where conflict doesn't own you. You recall Seneca, exiled and disgraced, writing letters that would outlive empires. You imagine him sitting alone, pen in hand, choosing dignity over bitterness. What a strange, quiet rebellion that is, to respond with grace when grace is the last thing expected. And so you lie here, part of that same tradition. Not as a grand philosopher, but as a person with a beating heart and a mind that's learning not to run from itself. You're starting to see, a meaningful life doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't need applause or milestones to validate it. It just needs intention, deliberateness, a willingness to live slowly in a fast world. And when the world tempts you back into the race, into the scrolling, the comparing, the endless pursuit of more, you can remember this moment, this quiet resistance, this inner nod that says, I'm already enough. You think about how often you've tried to fill silence, with distractions, with tasks, with noise that makes you feel productive but empties you slowly. The Stoics instead invited silence, because in silence the truth emerges, not the dramatic kind, the simple, unshakable kind, that you are not your status, you are not your plans, you are not your failures. You are a soul in motion, learning to sit still, a human being, not a human doing. This is your inheritance if you choose it, not through belief but through practice, like choosing stillness in a crowded room, like pausing before reacting, like choosing not to take the bait of every opinion, every expectation. You can feel the difference now, how good it feels not to perform, how freeing it is not to have to impress anyone, not even yourself. You are allowed to simply exist, to breathe, to feel, to let thoughts drift in and out like clouds. You're not failing when you slow down, you're remembering. And in that remembering, something subtle shifts. You no longer crave a life that looks good, you crave one that feels true. That's what the Stoics offered, not success but substance, not fame but freedom. And tonight, you touch that freedom, not as an abstract idea but as a real presence in your chest. It feels like a warm cup held between your hands, like a breath that doesn't rush out, like a life that fits, not because it's perfect, but because it's yours. You think of all the places you've chased yourself to, all the masks you've worn, all the times you measured your worth by how well you performed. And gently, kindly, you say, that was survival, but I'm allowed to live differently now. There's no need to abandon ambition, but now it comes with balance, with discernment, with a question echoing softly in your mind. Is this in harmony with who I really am? And if it's not, you trust yourself enough to let it go, because peace isn't the absence of challenge, it's the presence of clarity, and you are learning to be clear. So as the darkness deepens outside your window and your body sinks a little further into the stillness, you carry this truth like a stone in your palm. You don't need to chase your life. You only need to return to it, again and again, with gentleness, with honesty, with that steady voice inside you that says, "This is enough, I am enough. Now rest, you're floating now." Not in the way of drifting aimlessly, but like a leaf finally resting on water, buoyant, surrendered, held. The thoughts still come, they always will, but they arrive like birds passing across a wide sky. You see them, you let them move on. No judgment, no clinging, just space. You're beginning to understand what the Stoics meant by ataraxia, not the absence of thought, but freedom from being ruled by it. Emotional stillness, not emotional numbness. The strength to feel everything without letting it own you. You think back to a time, maybe even this morning, when your mind was racing, trying to control how others see you, worrying about outcomes you cannot predict, filling in silence with imagined conversations, possible disasters, invisible judges. It's a very human thing to do, but you're not just human, you're also capable of reflection, of redirecting the current instead of getting pulled under. That's the Stoic gift, not immunity to pain, but immunity to panic. You think of Marcus Aurelius again, ruling an empire, surrounded by chaos and sickness and betrayal. And yet in his journal there is no grandiosity, only quiet reminders. Hold your principles. Let go of the need for approval. Focus only on what you can control. You hold those thoughts now like small stones in your pocket. They are not heavy, they are grounding. And you realize you don't need more answers tonight. You need fewer distortions, fewer attempts to twist yourself into someone else's idea of what a meaningful life should be. You already know the way if you're quiet enough to listen. You always have. It's in the part of you that values peace over drama, simplicity over spectacle, truth over comfort. You've been in rooms full of noise, full of people, full of celebration, and still felt hollow. And you've been alone on an ordinary day doing nothing remarkable and felt full. That's not coincidence. That's insight. The Stoics didn't write their wisdom to impress, they wrote it to remember, to themselves, to us. So you too can write your life not as a script to impress others, but as a letter to your own soul. One word at a time, one breath at a time. The world may not notice your quiet choices, but your soul does. When you don't retaliate, when you don't chase, when you don't spiral, when you say, "This is enough." Not because you've given up, but because you've grown wiser. You've stopped negotiating with life for peace and simply claimed it as your right. Because peace doesn't come from having everything. It comes from needing less and knowing why you need what you keep. You remember the times you tried to prove your worth by doing more, being more, and how little joy that ever brought. And now this strange stillness wraps around you and you understand something that once felt impossible. You are not a project. You are not a brand. You are not a blueprint for success. You are a moment in time, unfolding. You are stardust with a nervous system. You are allowed to pause, to feel, to be soft. The Stoics were warriors of the mind, not of force. They taught that your most powerful act is choosing how you meet your life. And tonight you meet it with open hands, not trying to squeeze more from it, not trying to sculpt it into someone else's dream, just letting it be what it is and letting yourself be what you are. A work in progress, a soul in process, a being learning how to be. And when the noise returns tomorrow, as it will, you'll remember this. You'll remember that calm is not a mood, it's a skill. That peace is not a prize, it's a path. That you don't need to chase meaning. You only need to pay attention. And here in this stillness, you've done exactly that. You've come far, not in distance, but in depth. Each breath now feels slower, fuller, like a wave settling against the shore after a long journey. The sky behind your eyes darkens just slightly and the world becomes hushed. You are no longer trying to figure anything out. You're not even trying to rest. You simply are. The final paradox of the Stoic path reveals itself here. When you stop striving, when you stop resisting, freedom arrives on its own like the moon rising behind clouds, a soft light, a quiet unveiling. This life you've been chasing, maybe you never needed to catch it. Maybe you just needed to stop long enough to recognize you were living it already, beneath all the conditions, beneath all the some days. You think back to everything you've let go of in this journey, the need to be seen, the urge to control, the illusion of a perfect future, and in their place, something gentle, something present, an unarmored truth. You recall the words that held you upright on this path, some whispered by philosophers long gone, some whispered by the silence within. Control what you can, release what you can't, return to what matters. This, again and again, is the practice. Not a one-time awakening, but a daily remembering. You think of Epictetus, born a slave, walking with a limp, yet holding more freedom in his heart than the emperors who ruled him. He said, "You may fetter my leg, but not even Zeus can fetter my will." Tonight you carry that same flame, maybe not as a declaration, maybe not as a roar, but as a whisper inside your chest that says, "Nothing can take my inner peace unless I hand it over." You reflect on all the inner battles you've survived, the nights when your mind spun in circles, the days when your heart felt heavy with expectation, and still, you're here. Not because you escaped life's weight, but because you learned how to hold it differently. The Stoics never promised ease. They promised clarity, and you've earned it. In the letting go, in the quiet honesty with yourself, in the stillness you're learning to trust. And now, the final truth settles into you like a soft snowfall. You don't need to chase the life you think you should want. You need only tend gently to the life that wants you. The life that meets you in stillness, in presence, in a moment like this. And now the words slow. The story begins to dissolve. A few last thoughts linger in the hush before sleep. You're allowed to not know what comes next. You're allowed to start over. You're allowed to live simply, bravely, frailly, by your own rhythm. You are not a mistake. You are not too late. You are not too much. You are exactly as you should be for this moment. And that's all you ever needed. Wind down 300 words. The room around you has faded now. What remains is soft, like fog over a quiet lake or the hush of snowfall in a city asleep. Even your thoughts no longer press forward. They drift. Nothing urgent, nothing heavy. Your breath is the only thing you need to follow now. A rise, a fall, a rhythm as old as your first day on earth. Your body is safe. Your spirit is calm. There is nowhere to go and nothing to become. You've already arrived. Let yourself remember this sensation, not just tonight, but in moments when the world rushes at you again. When your schedule swells, when the voices outside get loud, when your own thoughts crowd you with doubt. Remember that your worth is not measured by movement. Your freedom is not found in busyness. It's in this stillness, in the space between thoughts, in the breath you're taking right now. Let go of your name. Let go of your roles. Let go of your plans, your proving, your pressure. All that matters is that you are here, breathing, resting, alive in this fragile, extraordinary now. So sleep gently, traveler. The road will still be there tomorrow, but tonight you have permission to do nothing but rest, and in that rest to heal, to return, to remember who you are beneath it all.